Good evening and welcome to The Square. Tonight is another series of conversation that we're having around affordable housing in Rwanda. And this time we're having this conversation with private sector players. Usually we have it with government officials, with civil society organizations. But when it comes to affordable housing in Kigali, tonight we're going to focus on the role of the private sector to look at the shortage of urban housing in Kigali. As studies show, there is a shortage of over 30,000 dwelling units. And this is in demand every year, and we want to look at how we can fill this gap, looking at the role of the private sector in looking at affordable housing in Rwanda. And I'm happy to welcome with us our guests representing the private sector, and I'll start with Fatou Kine Dieye. She has a very impressive background, and Fatou is here in her capacity as an advisor of affordable housing and green industrialization. But if you'll also allow me to read her background, Fatou is also, here with us. She also has specialty in you're a professional builder, a professor in building materials and construction technology at Columbia University, Graduate School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation. She's also an architectural designer by profession. Fatou, it's great to have you on the show.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Is this not your this is your first time?
Yes, first time on the square.
On the square. We're also joining us is Eric Salongo Kalisa. He is the Director of Operations at CFAR Housing Limited in Rwanda. Eric, great to have you on the square.
Thank you so much for
welcoming
me.
Thank you, Eric. And also joining us as always, resident panelist on the square, Charles Haber. Always a pleasure to have you.
Same here, Diana. How are you?
Good.
Yes.
I know this is your forte when it comes to construction and housing.
I was hoping I wouldn't be on the show.
So looking forward to hearing from you and your inputs. Square resident panelist Brenna Namata is always with us. Unfortunately, she's not here with us, but I'm sure she'll be tuning in from wherever she is at the moment. Like we do we have any midweek highlights before we kick off the show, Charles? Something you'd like to share with the viewers?
Of course, refugees and from the UK and the deal that Rwanda has done with the UK. It's, in my opinion, it's landmark. It's unprecedented that people can run away from Africa to Africa, but also to a better part of Africa. I think it's unprecedented. There's a lot. It's really landmark, and I hope we can digest it further and show on its own, because there are different sides to it. But I think I've said this before. I'll sing it time and time again. I want to smoke what the leadership of this country is smoking.
I think personally, my midweek highlight would also be that there's been really polarized opinions on it, from citizens in the UK, citizens in Rwanda. So looking forward to more, media bites that government officials will be sharing with media and Rwandan citizens alike to understand this decision better. So looking forward to having a show, like you said, about this on its own. So thank you to our viewers. I'd like to just say keep the hashtag going using the Square RW as we commence with conversation around affordable housing in Rwanda. Like I said earlier on, there's a gap between supply and demand, and Kigali's population is projected to more than double from the current 1.6 million citizens to 3.8 million Kigali residents by the year 2050. And like I said, the demand for housing, affordable housing, is rising more than its supply. And various studies show that Kigali city needs around 20,700 housing units every year, or rather 310,000 units by the year 2030. So I'd like to start with you, Fatou. This is clearly an urgent issue. And from your perspective, you've worn many hats as a private sector housing developer. If you could share with us what are some challenges in meeting this demand, and how are some of the institutions you've worked with, what are they doing, how are they working to meet this challenge?
Certainly. So I guess the first thing maybe I can quickly say, housing delivery is complicated. And so this supply-demand gap is something that we see in many markets, not just in the Rwandan market. And I think maybe a good way to think about it and to approach thinking about what responses, especially that I've been involved in, is to kind of look at the value chain. So housing really is a series of value chain links, and if any link is broken, the developer doesn't make any money and housing doesn't get delivered. And so if we look at, for example, conditions in unplanned settlements, the broken link there is that, of course, there's no finance to build, and the regulations might be too onerous to build a big house. A big developer might have a constraint in terms of construction finance. That makes his value chain break and the difficulty to be able to meet the demand. Now, the work that I've had the pleasure of doing is a little bit all over the value chain. So working with partners like Access to Finance Rwanda, who are really looking to bring in end user finance solutions for those at the bottom of the income pyramid so they can actually be able to get housing. Also, I've worked with, as the former managing director of SCAT Consulting Rwanda, really looking at building materials and how to deliver locally sourced materials that can help bring down the cost of housing so that people can actually be able to afford them and make sure that materials are available. And I also worked with the city of Kigali, how to do neighborhood planning that is green and sustainable so that you can actually start to introduce solutions to be able to get economies of scale that can drop down prices.
And what would you say, you know, just from your perspective, having worked in Kigali, I mean, you've outlined them, but what are some of the key challenges when it comes to affordable housing?
So construction finance for sure.
Yes.
With interest rates at 16% and that you have to pay back within 2 years, it's really hard for a developer to mobilize all of that cash to be able to build. On the other hand, you have a population that might not have either they're in the informal sector, so their money isn't visible to a bank to be able to get a mortgage. So that's one of the issues. And then, you know, materials. There are material shortages. So if you want to start to build, you might be able to get half your houses done, and then you have to scramble to be able to get materials to complete your project. So really, at every part of the chain, there is something that is a challenge, and it's how the developer can organize himself with the other partners, with the stakeholders, to fix those, to then allow the houses to come out smoothly.
Yeah. And, you know, so access to finance, the price of construction materials. You also mentioned you worked with SCAT Consulting, and many of our viewers would know that as the 8 million franc, sorry, not even the 8 million franc house. And I remember it was showcased at the Expo. I think this was 2016?
2017.
2017. And it looked too good to be true. And my question, just as a follow-up, you know, on that, and I know you're no longer there, but you know, you were the managing director of SCAT Consulting, 8 million francs to our house. You showcased it in Kigali Expo in 2017 as a clear, tangible example of affordable housing. And where do we stand right now if we're to look at those sort of that sort of housing project? Where do we stand right now? Is it something that's replicable? And or was it just, you know, something was showcased, you know, one time? So I'm keen to know on behalf of viewers where such affordable housing projects stand at the moment.
Great question. One thing, it's really good that Eric is here because he followed in the path of using some of the techniques and solutions that were proposed by the Swiss project that SCAT was implementing. But today, I'm happy to say there are about 2,500 copycat buildings all over Rwanda, Burundi, and Congo, Eastern Congo. And using the construction technology, even some of the IDP model villages are using the technology that we introduced. Since it was really a construction technology and not an architecture, people have taken it and adapted it all different kinds of ways, put the Rwandan flavor on it, the Burundian flavor, and so you'll see iterations of it everywhere. And the project itself took it the next step by doing not just the single house, but doing a multifamily unit. So there's a 10 unit building which was constructed, there's a 27 unit building that was just finished, and there are 60 more units in the pipeline in Kimisagara and Gitega sectors. So it's actually quite exciting to see that and BK is actually financing now another one of these units. So we're really proud, and SCAT should be incredibly proud, as well as the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation that financed it, in the fact that this has been taken over and really become part of the DNA of some of the construction industry here.
Thank you. I'd like to go to Eric Salongo.
Yes,
Kalisa, and you're here representing C4 Housing Limited. I think it's relatively new to the market, at least looking at the last 5 years. Same, you know, 8 million franc house, and I remember it was showcased at the Expo. I think this was 2016, 2017. question to you, Eric. What are some of the challenges, other than the ones we've already listed, when it comes to affordable housing and looking at the shortage in Kigali when it comes to affordable urban housing? What are some of the challenges and how is CFAR Limited working to address this issue?
Yeah, thank you. Challenges. Before even going to the challenges, let me just explain a bit about the CFAR, which is a project building 450 units in Kabeza, turning into the affordable market. And we tried to put 1-bedroom unit, 2-bedroom unit, 3-bedroom, and 4-bedroom, just to make sure that we meet the expectation or trying to satisfy the demand of each category of the clients. And also we tried to emphasize on the quality, because housing is also a long-term investment, and the quality should be on the center of the investment. So, taking into those considerations, few challenges was there. I will say we can make the challenges in 3 categories. The first one being the policy on the affordable housing. And we are talking about the 35 million, which now it's changed to be 40 million. We are talking about the size of the units. The policy itself was not appropriate to meet the developer side. Maybe it was meant to address the client, but not the developer. It was very hard to meet that criteria. The second challenge or consideration is on the side of the technology that the developer you are putting. How long are you doing the construction? The longer you build, more challenges and more risk on your side. And the third category is now everything related to not directly to the building, but what I call indirect costs. The indirect costs I'm talking about, and Fatou just mentioned it, the financing, we are talking about the VAT, we are talking about the land, the cost of the land. We are talking about the exchange rate. I'm just giving you an example of CFAR. We started the project in 2019. The exchange rate was at 820. Today it is almost 1,440. So we think about the cost of the marketing, the cost of the design and supervision, which is a mandatory. So all those those are factors that you need to consider when you are building, but are not related to the building itself. And that cost, if you put that cost itself, it is almost 50%, 60% of the total cost of the building. So we have been discussing also just to bring back to the question, the direct question, how do we close the gap? And I will say the demand is, according to the study, 20,000 units per year. That's demand. CFAR, after 2 years, we are building now, we are about to complete 52 units. We have been there for what? 3 years now? We are selling 50% of the units that we are building. So what does it mean? It means that we will complete the construction and continue waiting the clients to come. So the study are talking about 20 good numbers, but as a developer, we want to see it in our book. So I don't know, and let me appreciate this forum and so many other forums that are there to discuss this issue and see how all we can be in one room and see how the bank, the policymaker, the developer, and even the voice of the client, we need also to hear them what they want, what type of units they are looking for. We have one bedroom. I can tell you, whoever is buying the one bedroom is not for living it, it's for business aspect of it, which is not really addressing that issue of owning a house to that people, but also it's a business opportunity. So it's really, I will say, a combination of so many challenges that it's through this kind of forum that we can address, and each and everyone intervene to the solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eric. And I really like that you know, amongst the challenges you mentioned, you also looked at the listening to the client, and some critique or some feedback, you know, from Rwandan citizens or Rwandan urban dwellers have been, there's a mismatch in between the demand, what is really needed on the ground, vis-a-vis, you know, what developers actually develop in terms of housing, you know, especially this comes from low income earners. A lot of critique is that it goes to high income earners or higher socioeconomic bracketed people. And, you know, we've had this discussion on the show before, whereby I think prior to engaging in these projects, there needs to be a thorough understanding of market analysis and market needs, looking at some of the construction of the houses, and you know, this gap has still been growing over the years. But things are looking good. There have been some projects that have been launched, at least in this year and the past, looking at low income and affordable housing. So we'll break that down, but thanks for pointing that out, Eric. Charles, your thoughts on this, you know, challenges in this sector when it comes to urban affordable housing?
Just when you thought that the numbers are dazzling, you need to consider that the gap is growing. Now, Eric and Fatu did mention something very important around the planning aspect and the time it takes to plan. Eric and I want to put a time factor to what Eric was just talking about, that they said they conceived their project 3-4 years ago, if my memory serves me right, but they've only just managed to deliver 50 units. Why? The bulk of the work goes in planning. We've had different government officials on the square here around this topic, and the question that keeps coming up is, where are the houses? Where are the houses? Because even the example that Eric just gave of increasing the ceiling of what they deem as affordable from $35 to $40 million to allow the developers to be able to make a little bit of money, that decision alone has taken a bit of time, but it will not necessarily lead to an overnight increase in the number of houses, because there's a bit of time that goes into planning. It doesn't help that Kigali is growing exponentially. Yeah. Just when we thought that we're building enough houses for Kigali city dwellers, now all of a sudden 4,500 refugees from different parts of the world are coming already to compete with the little or nothing that we have. So we have to brace ourselves for that harsh reality, and I want to commend the government of Rwanda for the initiatives that have been done. Giving credit where it's due, fantastic steps in the right direction, and I'll probably say 2 or 3. One, we need to keep at the back of our minds that whether you like it or not, developers have to be pampered and begged and coerced to go into the affordable housing space, because there isn't money to be made, really.
There's really reluctance on their part.
There's huge reluctance.
Serious reluctance. Yes. Yeah.
In other markets, there's a huge drive to go into that affordable housing space, because the middle income segment and the higher income segments are saturated, and you know there's too much supply in our market. There's hardly anything across all the entire pyramid of the housing that you look at. So why go to fight to deliver houses of 20 million francs, yet you can deliver houses of 100 million francs that would be sold overnight, and you don't have the problem of dead stock that Eric has. So that coercion, government has done quite a number of things. Today they are providing land, they are providing affordable mortgages as low as 11% for the end users. They are now talking about, they have actually provided infrastructure for developers. To the best of my knowledge, the likes of SCAT and CIFA Housing have benefited from that amongst other developers. They are even taking it a notch higher and saying they will provide offtake for that's a guarantee buyback of the units that you build. I think I saw that happening with that BRD announcement a few weeks ago. So there's an ever increasing thirst from the part of government of Rwanda to be able to address that issue. And now they're even going into private-public partnerships to be able to sort of stimulate that supply. And so that is being done. Is it enough? Probably not. Can more be done? Definitely yes. And in terms of what more can be done, it's just, and it doesn't require reinventing the wheel too much, you know. And I like what Eric talked about, the other aspects of the construction cycle that are not the house itself. You see, and that is one area where I know Fatu might punch me in the face when you walk out of this studio, is that constructive technologies are amazing. But almost all the technologies that are finding themselves onto the market today are just for the walls. Whereas the entire housing cycle is a lot more than just the four walls that you have. And that's the point that Eric was saying. You know, you have your design, your infrastructure, your financing, your sales process, your after-sales process, the management, the legislation, and so on and so forth. The professional services, you know, in our market today, try and look for a construction project manager. You will struggle so much. Yeah. And there's a few of those other factors that all need to be looked into sort of one pot as we talk about affordability.
Yeah, it's an issue, and I don't mean to be an alarmist, but you know, you look at the exponential growth numbers, you're looking at the studies that are projecting these numbers in 2030, in 2050, and like Charles, you said, as much as you know, the solutions are being identified and sought out and being implemented, the challenges also keep on exponentially growing. So it's almost like a race against trying to provide a solution and not. But Charles, while you were talking, what do you think about this whole progressive suggestion of rent to own? You know, what as a potential solution? You know, I'm putting myself in the mind of someone who you're telling me the affordable number is 35 million. To many Rwandans, to many Kigali inhabitants, that's, you know, last time we had the show and we talked about that on our social media feed, people kind of, you know, were not amused about that number, saying this is the affordable bracket, 35 million to be a homeowner. What do you think about the whole rent-to-own strategy?
I think
if it's something we implemented, you know, deliberately.
Absolutely, absolutely. We've had, and first of all, we're not reinventing the wheel.
Yes.
And I'll give one or two examples of projects that have been very successful on. So they're in some markets they'll call it rent to own. In other markets they'll call them tenant purchase schemes. In other markets they'll call them lease to own, but it all means one and the same thing. You rent up to a certain period until the house becomes yours. Now that is a very, very easy way to get onto the property ladder for especially first home owners. That's the first thing to consider. But also the second thing is that when you get into a tenant purchase scheme, or it's the calculation is usually tied down to how much have you otherwise been renting. And it pains that you will see an ordinary person, a receptionist in an office somewhere or an admin officer somewhere, they pay quite a lot of rent in comparison to their earnings. So that almost leaves them with nothing to be able to save if you go by the high cost of living in Kigali. Now, that's a fantastic solution. When RSS BK Social at the time did the Vision 2020 houses, they struggled to sell them. Fast forward, they put up a rent to own scheme and they were sold overnight. Now, we need there are two gaps that sort of need to be covered for tenant purchase schemes to be successful in our country. Number one by far is institutions that are specialized, because by capitalization, it means you need to have access to long-term funds. In the absence of long-term capital, then your assets are actually the houses themselves. So what kind of institution are you? Are you a financial institution? Are you a non-deposit taking financial institution? So there's a bit of a legal gap in how you structure a tenant purchase scheme. And I think whether you will throw it at Central Bank or whether you throw it at Rwanda Housing Authority, I am not too sure what regulatory framework that needs to be put in place, or whether you're a developer yourself who has that patience of waiting for 15 years to get back your money. That's a different story. Should CFA Housing get all their houses and say they are not going to make their money from the immediate sale, but they'll make their money cumulatively over 10 years? Probably yes. Yes. So I think that is one thing. But the second one that's very, very important is for all of us to understand that you don't necessarily have to own a house for it to be affordable. It should also be affordable to rent. And that is rental schemes, purely affordable rental schemes are yet to come onto the market. And I'm aware that the city of Kigali is toying around that idea of having municipal houses that are affordable to rent. But I also think other institutions that have patient capital, for example, the Catholic Church, or even RSSB for that matter, some of these entities that have very patient capital should be going into rental housing schemes. Yes.
Fatou, before we go to the next part of the conversation, just to give you a chance to respond to what Charles and Eric have shared.
Ooh, this is the good stuff. Indeed, I agree with you. The rental market is huge, and right now it's mostly in the informal sector. So figuring out how to formalize rental really is a main challenge. But then my question is, we talk about rent to own, but let's think about the fact that most people, they own a house to be able to rent it. And they are the providers of rental income. Why not support them to be able to, 70% of your population self-builds in Kigali. They build their own house, and they do that because of cost, but they also do it because they need to make money from the rental units that they build. Why not support them in getting financing for them to continue to provide the rental housing, but they can provide it formally with better construction techniques. Just one step up, they can still target the same population and really have those people be the ones that we target rather than always the big 500, 1,000 unit projects that take time and money and courage like Eric and CFAR have. But all those small people, if we kind of switch it on its head and say, okay, how do we help you become better renters and better housing providers? Since you do it anyway, you're already mobilized. We don't have to reinvent anything. We can, build new finance structures and small products and work at a smaller scale, but over a bigger percentage of the population. I think that really has enormous potential. And we have to start thinking that way. Creatively, we also need to start thinking about incremental, meaning I deliver half your house, then you can build the other half, or I deliver half, and then later on, I deliver 3/4, etc., that your house can grow over time as you get more money to be able to access it. But at least right now, you have access to water and sanitation, and you have a roof over your head, and minimal, your basic needs are met, your human rights are met, but then little by little we can figure out how to finance it and get you to grow. And we have to start being creative like that, in addition to what's happening, with the bigger scale developers.
Listening to you, I'm just wondering, isn't that sort of thinking, that sort of mindset, isn't it happening, as we're here talking about these issues, isn't it happening between private sector and government or regulatory authorities when it comes to this housing issue?
It is,
because I don't think what you're saying is you're the first person to think it. So I'm just wondering, why are we not seeing tangible examples of it on the ground here in Kigali?
Money.
Yeah, I mean, I'm listening to you and I'm just thinking, it's a great idea and I don't know why it's not being implemented. Charles, do you want to comment on that quickly before we go to Eric?
She mentions the point around money and capital. Competing demands are enormous. When government woke up in the morning and said if we provided infrastructure support to developers, it would be enough. Then that sector will look after itself. The infrastructure support was there, no houses were built. They said, oh, hang on a second, what else can we do better? Let's provide mortgage finance to the end user. Okay, fine. What percentage? 11%, 11.5%, 20, 25 years. Okay, fine. Tick. Okay, are there more mortgages? No, because there's no supply. Okay, how else do we better stimulate the supply? Can we provide the land? So government is in an ever wanting to improve position. It's not very often that I am full of praise for their initiatives, but I think they're huge steps in the right direction. Yeah.
Eric, just before we go to the next aspect of green construction, green industrialization when it comes to housing projects, just any feedback you have so far based on what Charles and Fatou have shared.
Yeah, thank you. Right now, SIFA, we are actually exploring the rental to own the house, not by choice, but by challenge. We have 4-bedroom units that we found that on the market is not responding the way it should. Because, as I said, every time a developer needs to think for the client, and the client at this stage, they don't want a 4-bedroom in apartment. They want 4-bedroom, it has to be a standalone unit, not an apartment. We did apartment, it's not very successful on the market, so to make it successful, we are thinking about, we're exploring to see how we can do rental to own. But as I said, it's not by choice, it's by challenge. One of the reasons we still have to pay our mortgage in 2 years, in 3 years. And the rental to own, we are talking about 10, 15 years. That's the problem, and how to solve this issue is just bring the missing gap, which is the mortgage bank. The mortgage bank should be the one coming to finance a developer for more than 15, 20, 25 years, so that the developer can also put on the market a house to rent. We have so many other examples about what we've been talking about, but typically rental is the way to go. The market is just exponential, is huge, and we have to address that. And with the UK deal, it's just increasing positively I will say the stress, but the opportunities are there, and I like let's say that today, the affordable housing is coming from far. From 2017, 16, when we saw the first policy, up to today, there have been a lot of changes positively, but we still have some gap that we still need to fill. We are talking about the land, but when you're saying that, the policy is saying that, yes, we'll give you the land, but you have to build 2,000 units in 3 years. That's the policy. And let it be clear now, it is possible to do 2,000 units in 3 years. It is possible. But the developer needs to get what you just mentioned, off-takers guarantee, that if we put those units on the ground, we will not wait for 5 years. Think about RSSB. You just talk about RSSB, let's call it Phase 1, Kagugu, Vision City. How long did it take to sell? after completion. How many developer can wait? And we can't even talk about CFA and RSSB. It's not something that should be in the same statement in terms of financing capacity. As a developer, we cannot, the off-taker guarantee that you just mentioned, which is a key to solve one of these gap that we are seeing today, we're still very far to the implementation phase. It's still, we are, the policymakers, the developer, we are pushing for it. The policymakers are thinking how to make it happen. Who should buy those units? Should we ask RDB or BRD or RSSB or BK to buy the units? Who should buy? And so it's still in thinking process, but that's the key. With already existing policy in place, if the government, if the policymakers can solve that issue of the off-taker guarantee, we will see many units on the market than what we have today, because that's the most risk that the developer will still have today yeah, as I said, we are CFA, we are doing 450. We started with 50 to test the market. We know already that we cannot continue with 4-bedroom because it didn't work, but the demand is there. But we don't have time to wait for that demand to come. That's the key. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eric. You know, Charles, you mentioned something earlier on. First of all, Erica, I was struck by what you said when you said, you know, when it comes to potential, you know, investors or people who take the burden, the financial burden, you cannot put CFAR and RSSB in the same bracket. Those should not be in the same statement when it comes to addressing this issue. You know, you said something of, regarding patient capital, and you said, you know, government has done a lot indeed, but do you think institutions like RSSB that have the potential to have that patient capital should delve a bit deeper in addressing this challenge? What are your thoughts on that?
Government has done a lot, but has it done everything? No. Whether you like it or not, the government cannot run away from being directly involved in building and delivery of the houses. Even in the most developed of economies, if you go to London, there are council flats. If you go to, even in our neighboring countries, you have building societies, you have housing financiations, you have housing companies that are fully owned subsidiaries of the government that actually build the houses. And the logic is very, very simple. It's because government does not make money from 30% margin and selling to you a condominium. It's improving your livelihood that matters most. It's putting you onto the property ladder. It's making you comfortable to work for the government that matters. It's just the same logic as taking you to school, building for you a nice hospital, giving you medical insurance, making sure you have nice roads onto which you drive, or footpaths and what have you. So that is indeed the major missing link, in my opinion, that a government institution, and whether it is an offshoot of Rwanda Housing Authority or Rwanda Housing Authority itself, they need to fold their sleeves, get their hands dirty, pick a shovel, and actually build the houses. And I'll give you an example of where it has been done in this country, and it has been extremely successful. I think around 2006, 2007, we had a big problem of an eyesore of the city of Kigali as you're driving in.
Yes.
Yes, and I'll refer to it in Kinyarwanda as Kiyovu Chabazachira. That lower Kiyovu was an eyesore. Government, through 3 institutions at the time, went somewhere in Batsinda, did 250 units. They actually built the houses and delivered them. Today, you go to Batsinda, it's a town. It's really metamorphosized. Go to Busanza. There's a project there that has been done. I think phase 1 was done with a private developer. Phase 2, which is 3-4 times the size of phase 1, was done was delivered by the engineering regiment. Now, the RDF and any institution that's around it are known as no-nonsense guys, and when they get to something, they actually deliver it on time and on cost. Go to Karama. There is a 400-unit model village that was done, again, through government and like-minded institutions that are around government. I think engineering regiment, again, and the city of Kigali. So if it has worked, why don't we just keep doing it? That's exactly my point. Yes, because if then it would allow the likes of CFA Housing and anyone else who's along the value chain not to cry to be stopped from making money because they want to get into your subsidies. If you see where Eric's project is and his environs, it's a fantastic location. If he had an option to sell at whatever price that he wants, to build whatever size he wants, he would be smiling all the way. But he's cornered, yes. So yes, government has to get its hands dirty, yes.
I want us to just talk about green industrialization, like green, when you're constructing this house, thinking about the environment, carbon footprint. We cannot have this conversation, even when it comes to affordable housing, in urban areas, without tackling this. And I want to just start with you, Fatu, based also on your expertise and your background in this particular field. How best can private developers use green infrastructure to develop sustainable housing projects, with a low carbon footprint?
So I believe that Rwanda can be the leader on this. And quite a few steps have already been made. And so what the developer can do is really start breaking down the project and looking at the project components. And one of the components is which is of course one of my favorites, is the building material. And really thinking about owning and managing your supply and investing in local supply. I think that's particularly important for not only climate issues. We know that buildings are one of the biggest emitters of GHG emissions, but also from being able to secure your supply. As we saw during the pandemic, the minute you have a problem at the border, everything drops, and then all your building stops and your costs go way up. The guy who's making the gravel can't go to work because he's at home. The cost of gravel shoots up, your cement goes up. So we really need to have those local supply chains for environment reasons as well as for cost reasons in terms of affordability. So that's one thing that the developer can do. But then we need to look at energy. We need to look at water supply. Can we treat and reuse water? Can we do rainwater harvesting? Also in terms of sanitation, because that is a huge cost for a developer. And it's one of those upfront costs that Eric is talking about, that you've got to put in your wastewater treatment plant that meets XYZ criteria, and that all the maintenance also needs to be financed. Can you look at solutions that are off-grid and that are settlement size? So in Rwanda, there have actually been some projects that have pioneered what they're calling community sanitation gardens or wastewater wetlands, where they're treated locally, and that is totally off-grid, doesn't use major chemicals, can be done naturally, and then slightly treated at the end to be able to recycle that. That's one way to deal with your sanitation and waste that is completely about dropping your low carbon footprint.
And it's already happening in some areas.
It's already happening and even Kinigi, one of the model villages, has that system. The school in Hare School in Bugesera also has one of those systems. And if we can start to, and the person who's doing it I think is a great thinker, it's actually a biochemist, if we can start to bring developers together with those solutions, it's 45,000 euros for 1,500 users. That is no money for a sanitation system. So can we start to do things like that that are environmentally friendly but also cost friendly? Because when we talk about sustainability, we want to be economically sustainable as well as environmentally and socially sustainable. So, energy, solar, different things that people have talked about, but how to integrate that into your project, and how can the government be providing subsidies for some of that usage and really help in the planning phases. Because when you start to think about green also, it's the building, yes, and the neighborhood, but you want to start to understand catchments and floods and where water is coming and how to collect that. And that's a planning issue that needs to be accompanied by the government to really support the developer to be able to make those investments going forward.
Interesting. And just listening to you, Fatu, it also looks like, when we're talking about green industrialization, when it comes to urban housing projects, we really need to stop working in silos, whether it's from government, from the developer, listening to the needs of also the communities around that area, the environment around that area. So I know we sing it a lot on the square, but Charles, the whole aspect of institutional organization, coordination, and not working in silos, because this is the future of building in this country. I mean, I think it will reach a point whereby, just getting an okay, a tick to develop housing, if you don't have this, it will be a no-go. And this will just be in a few, within at least this decade. Same question to you, Eric, what are some solutions you can identify when it comes to building green when we're talking about urban housing, to just, respect the environment and reduce carbon footprint in this regard?
Yeah, thank you. Are we talking about green and affordable in the same sentence?
It's a good question, because we know it's far from affordable.
Yeah.
Yes.
So everyone, it should be, green sustainability should be the concern of each and every one, any citizen, leave alone the developer. But at the moment, you are putting a ceiling on the selling price, things become tougher. As a developer, you start doing selection of what you can do and what you cannot do. I will just give you a very simple example of, we first as a CIFA housing, we were trying to put solar hot water, which is the basic element on the unit. But that model costs 1.5 million itself. But you still have to consider in the design the roof that is holding the panels and the tank. You still have to consider, if your roof is holding that loads, it means that your foundation should be able also to hold everything together. So I'm just talking about, by deciding to put a hot water system, your cost is just go up from the foundation, your column and beams, your roof structure. You need to take into consideration that, which is okay. But what is your other solution? You go for electric hot water. It costs you 150,000 francs, $150. So now you cannot increase your price. You cannot even escalate that cost in 10, 15 years, assuming that we have a green bank that is financing any green element that you're putting on the house, and you say, okay, we are putting this, we are financing it, but you will pay in 10 years. So I think if you think about 1.5 million in 10 years, maybe the owner, you will put on his price, maybe he will be paying what? 1,000 francs, 2,000 francs per month? That's something that he can afford. And long term is sustainable, is green, everything. But because we are having that gap from the developer to put that system in place, and someone has to pay it. If the developer, you cannot pay it, it means that the client will have to pay it. But you cannot increase it on the price. So what do? You sacrifice the green element. With tears, but you do.
Thank you very much. Eric, for really breaking it down, especially for people like us who are not in this industry. And like it always is with these conversations, they go by so quickly. We have less than 7 minutes to conclude. So I'd just like to read some of the tweets coming in from our viewers regarding the very insightful comments shared by Fatou, Eric, and Charles. One of the first tweet, if you could have it on our screens, is from Seromba, who says that one reason in rising housing prices, especially for renters, rent prices have been increasing in all low-income renters. And low-income renters spend on average over 40% of the disposable income on housing and are thus considered overburdened. I think, Charles, he echoes what you said earlier on. We have another tweet also coming in from one of our viewers. If you could have this on our screens. This is from Paul, and Paul says that, if you could have this on our screens, great deals by CFAR Housing, such as the lease-to-own scheme, a good idea, good way to affordability. It's a great idea, but like we say, there are many challenges in putting this in practice. We also have another tweet coming in saying we need patient capital in order for affordable housing schemes to succeed. Mickey definitely echoes what a lot of us are saying here tonight on the square. We have another tweet coming in from Enoch who says, thank you for the show. I agree with Fatou. He also says that Eric mentioned about the mindset with consumers not wanting apartments. A client comes for a visit and says, can we modify this, but the apartment is on the 3rd floor. That is actually an interesting comment on the realities on the ground with, what developers are giving and the demands that need to be met, that the consumers want to be met. So keep the tweets coming. I just want us to go to concluding remarks regarding all the insightful solutions, challenges outlined by our guests, and I'll start with you, Fatou, just very briefly before we go to Enoch. Your concluding remarks, what needs to be done when it comes to affordable housing in Kigali, looking at the challenges regarding, the shortage between supply and demand, and the impending projections of growth in the next decade or two.
Okay. So I definitely believe that projects like Green City Kigali, which are really trying to tackle everything from at a scale that becomes interesting, from the planning of a neighborhood to then the infrastructure that goes in that neighborhood to the delivery of housing at scale. We need to continue to champion those types of exercises. However, really, the active people on the ground who are, people aren't in the street, they are sleeping somewhere. It might not be adequate housing, but it is housing. We really need to support that effort, that 80% of the population, that they are housing suppliers. They are mini developers. We need to pick and be able to support them to deliver better housing solutions for people, even as we're constantly building and putting in place these policies and these longer issue targets. So there are, I guess, if you think of a tapis roulant, one of those treadmill, exactly. We have to run on 3 treadmills, 4 treadmills at once, and keep advancing things that are short-term solutions, the medium and long-term, and that's from the finance, from the infrastructure, from the offtake, all the links in the chain on each one of these treadmills really needs to be addressed urgently, and we have to be willing to experiment and take risk. And the government needs to help de-risk the industry as well as the finance, help de-risk developers to be able to do our job and continue to create and innovate on the ground.
Thank you very much, Fatou. Eric, over to you, closing remarks.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity. And for the developer, I will say what we are looking for for the government is the off-takers guarantee, the taxes, and tax, VAT, and TEPER, and all those things. That's I know the government can do something about it. So. Other thing that we need is seeing the government engaging the developer in the discussion on the policy making. Hearing and lastly maybe is again the mindset of the population, of the client. You are people, we should understand our situation and accept our situation. You want a 4-bedroom, a 3-bedroom because you're seeing yourself married in 3 years. You want a 3-bedroom, but you want to pay 50,000 a month. How does that work together? So accept where you are and go for what you have now. Upgrade as you go and as your situation changes. Land, it is there, but not as favorable as the developer would want it to be. 2,000 units in 3 years is still a big challenge if we don't have off-takers. If you say we have off-takers of 2,000, SIFA tomorrow will engage for 2,000 units because we want to get that land, but we want also to have that. So
If you can conclude as quickly as possible, Eric.
Yeah, just that was my last one, my last comment. Thank you.
Thank you. I really like, Eric, when you said government, I don't know how tangible, how possible it is, government involving developers in the policy process, because it does affect the work, it does affect opportunities, it does affect the solutions in addressing this shortage. So that's good food for thought. Charles, we have less than 1 minute. Any closing remarks from your end?
I just wanted to, I've already mentioned my point about what government should do to close the gap, but I want to talk about the greening aspect of it. Just green is expensive. Eric is absolutely right, but only in the short run.
Yes.
Yes.
Not in the long term, it is very cheap.
Amazing savings.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much for two. It's been an honor having you on the show. Charles, always an honor having you on the show. Pleasure having you. Yeah. And Eric, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been a pleasure hearing from you and the work CFAR Housing is doing. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you to our viewers for tuning in and keeping us engaged with your comments. Please keep them coming using hashtag The Square RW. To our partners, Uzi Collections and Bourbon Coffee, thank you for always supporting The Square. To our viewers, have a good night. See you again next week. Thank you.